We're live, Kathy.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This is the Monday, January 11th, 2021 meeting of the Planning, Economic Development, Land Use Committee. Committee members present, myself, Kathy Fahey, the chair, Councilmember Joyce Love, Councilmember Judy Doche, Councilmember Tom Hoey, and I don't see Alfredo yet, Councilmember Ballerin, but I know he's coming. We also have Councilmember Mike O'Brien, Councilmember Jack Flynn. We have our staff, Danielle Gillespie, our city clerk, Michelle Andre, our senior legislative aide, our council, John Rafael Pichardo, and we also have Brad Glass from the Department of Planning, Amy Levine from Corporation Counsel's Office, and Councilmember Ballerin is here. And then we have individuals from the community. Welcome, everyone. We're here tonight to discuss Ordinance 2092-20. That's an ordinance amending Chapter 375 of the Code of the City of Albany. That's the Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance, changing the zoning classification of 1057 Washington Avenue and 1061 Washington Avenue from mixed use neighborhood center to residential to family, and amending the zoning map accordingly. Okay, so this legislation is brought forth by Councilmember Mike O'Brien. So what I thought we'd do is start with you, Mike, and briefly discuss why you're bringing this forth. And then I'd like to go into public comment, and then we can have more discussion on it. So if you could go ahead, Mike.
Okay. Well, this involves some houses that are on Washington Avenue, just west of the intersection with Colvin Avenue. And you may remember that this site was the subject of a proceeding in front of the planning board involving stewards. They wanted to purchase those two houses, demolish them, which would bring them right up smack against one-family homes on Rosemont Street. So that went to the planning board. The planning board denied that application. But a number of the neighbors, and Hyde Clark is going to be commenting because I see he's in the queue. Hyde and those neighbors took up a petition for a rezone, and the argument that they made was that, in fact, those two properties, 1057 and 1061, were built as two-family homes. Have always existed as two-family homes, even before, certainly before the current zoning, and even before the zoning before that. I believe the date of those homes makes them certainly more than 80 years old, probably more closer to 90 years old. And the previous code had them zoned as commercial office, which was kind of an anomaly, because in fact, they were only used as two-family homes, although in that area of Washington Avenue, there are some small businesses such as family daycare and a midwifery and a dentist office, which were legal because they maintain residential components. And the only commercial business, I believe, that was ever in either of those businesses, according to the owner, was a small real estate office, which at the planning board meeting, which we had regarding this, Amy Levine gave her opinion that, in fact, nothing is really changing for them because they could continue to use it for that same kind of small business. One that doesn't impact the neighborhood, and they have the off-street parking. So it's really an effort to preserve the character of what they have always been and prevent the, this would be the only, if you look at Washington Avenue from Manning Boulevard West all the way to the state office campus, it's residential with the exception of Colvin Avenue. And Colvin Avenue is kind of an anomaly. How the gas station arrived on Colvin Avenue, that predates me. I believe that was under the days of Corning as mayor. It's technically a Colvin Avenue address, as I understand it, not a Washington Avenue address. And the same with the bank building. I can understand the bank because that could have been commercial office, and Colvin Avenue right down to Washington was zoned commercial office. But we thought that commercial, or at least I and the neighbors thought that commercial office characterization ended, at the end of the property that Key Bank owned. It turns out that it ended, that it went further, those two properties further west. And so when the new code was adopted, that's why, kind of unbeknownst to us, it included those two properties as mixed-use neighborhood center, even though in fact they've always been used as residential. So the neighbors petitioned to have this rezoned as what it looks like as R2. And that's why we're here. And we did a short form of, we went to the city planning board, and they basically approved it, but said, consider perhaps mixed-use neighborhood edge, which in my conversations with the neighbors, that would allow a lot of heavier uses than it ever could have had under, commercial office. Heavier uses such as indoor entertainment, bars, restaurants. I don't have the full list, but so obviously the neighborhood does not think that using it as converting it to mixed-use neighborhood edge would be of any consequence. And their feeling is that, in fact, it's always existed as a residential. That's what the buildings have been used for, and that's what this zoning attempts to protect.
Okay, thanks,
that's
Mike.
basically my summary.
All right, so that's an introduction. And so why don't we move to public comment now? And I have a list here. Let's see. I have Gary Demalowitz. Gary, are you here?
Miss Fahey, should we put like a time frame so everybody has the same time to talk? Or?
Sure. Why don't we say 5 minutes?
Okay, I'll start a timer.
Thank you. Gary, are you here? And Gary is one of the property owners. I'm not sure.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Gary?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd also like to say my wife Sandy is here, and also would like 5 minutes if we could add her to the list.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, go
Good
ahead.
evening. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Gary Demalowitz, and along with my wife, we are the owners of 1057 Washington Avenue. Our family at one time have owned over 3 buildings on Washington Avenue and lived in the neighborhood for over 60 years. So we know the neighborhood better than most. I'd like to talk about the inconsistency in the petition and some of the quotes that the councilman made. First of all, comparing Washington Avenue to Rosemont Street is like comparing apples to oranges. Rosemont Street is a dead-end street with single-family homes with no through traffic. One thing Rosemont Street does have in common with the rest is that their backyards all butt up against commercial property, just like my property on the east side. It is commercial before they bought their homes, and it was commercial when they bought before they were there, and it's commercial now. Excuse me, I'm talking fast because I only have 5 minutes. Now, Washington Avenue is a 4-lane road, which our building is on, the emergency route for police, fire, and ambulance. It's a truck and bus route. It has over 25,000 cars a day pass in front of our building on Washington Avenue. And as a gas station, dentist offices, and attorney's offices, and multi-unit apartments. Why the petition compares Rosemont Street and the people on Rosemont Street to Washington Avenue makes no sense. Our property is 100 feet from Colvin Avenue. Colvin Avenue is what we should be compared to. With respect to the signatures on a petition and the letter that was sent in, you would think that my house was on Rosemont Street, but if you look at those signatures, they're from the far end of Rosemont Street. There's a few from the upper end, and Lincoln Avenue, Euclid Avenue, Beachy Avenue, Melrose, not even close to our property. I have submitted over 50 signatures from neighbors and families that are right on and live across the street from Washington Avenue and Colvin. So when you speak of the neighbors, and I know the councilman does, you're not speaking for all the neighbors, because we have petitions of over 50 families in that neighborhood that support the Stewarts. And let's make it clear, this is all about Stewarts. They don't want another Stewarts or any other kind of development to come in on that property. So with respect to the property itself and why they want to change the zoning, because with respect to the letter that you received today, it says they want to ensure that there's no future development. Well, you know, that sends a bad precedent. It would be very bad public policy if the city is going to change zonings before projects are even announced. What message does that send to anyone who wants to invest in our city? I like to also mention a memorandum from Chris Spencer to the planning board stating that based on their objections, the review of the standards, it's the planning board's department, your own department, recommended that the proposal be approved and is consistent with the standards. So totally different from what the councilman says. It also states that Stewart's does not have a significant impact on traffic, that Stewart's provides much more well-rounded inventory, and typically a convenience store provides great variety of items and otherwise be required to a supermarket trip and saves residents time and fuel. This would not cause a negative impact on the environment or on any adjacent properties or the neighborhood. Again, inconsistent with the proposal and the objectives of the zone district, the character of the neighborhood in which this location and specific use standards are applicable to the user. I would like, it would be,
1 minute remaining.
I would, oh boy. Okay, so thank you. Let me get, I would like to note, in my 30 years in the legislature representing the 14th ward, part of the 8th ward, I never saw zoning changes from mixed use to R2. It's bad public policy. And please note, the planning board agrees with me. They couldn't get a second to approve this change. They support my position, and I asked the committee to do the same. Vote no on this ordinance, and let's just kill it in committee where it should be and move forward. I'd like to thank the chairman and the committee for their time. And if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Why don't we have Sandy go next?
Oh,
Is she
thank
there
you.
with you? Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hello, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much. I'm Sandra Demolowitz, who also owns 1057 Washington Avenue. And that is not true that 1057 Washington Avenue has just been residential occupied. It's very clear that it comes to me that this is all about blocking Stewarts. There was no idea to rezone my property. I understand you feel the need to represent the people that are opposed to a Stewart's, but let's be fair. Why is it as many as 50 or more people in the immediate area, as close as if I put my hand out the window, I could actually touch these people that are in agreement of putting a Stewart's there? So why aren't they being representative? But instead they're being ignored. I don't think this is good democracy. I don't believe it's good government at work. Please rethink this and make wise choices. And I have one last thing to say. Quiet actions sometimes speak the loudest. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandy. The next speaker is Mr. Tim Hines. Tim, are you here? You have to unmute yourself.
All right, I'm here. We
Okay,
ready?
welcome, Tim. If you'd like to make a few comments, up to 5 minutes.
Yes, please. All right. Hello, my name is Tim Hines, and alongside my wife, we are the owners of 1061 Washington Ave. Our family has owned the property since 2006, but before that, my aunt and uncle lived there for decades. My uncle ran his real estate business out of the house for many years as well. While I've not used the property as commercial since I've owned it, I do reserve the right to do so. The zoning currently is mixed use and has been that way forever. This is essentially grandfathered in. The house used to be located on the corner where the bank is. The house was moved in order to put the bank in. The zoning lines have been correctly designed around my property to ensure that it could still be used as commercial at any time in the future. I'm very upset that the city is trying to take this away. Washington Ave is a main road with many businesses located on it. My dentist office is located on Washington Ave, less than a mile away from my property at 1061 Washington Ave. Excuse me. The ordinance comparing Washington Ave to Rosemont, which is not a great comparison. Rosemont is a dead-end residential street. Washington Ave should be compared to Colvin Ave, which would also be in between. Colvin Ave has many businesses located on it. This is a bad policy. This is coming up. I believe there is a political agenda going on here. The last line of this notice says there are no fiscal impacts, none. As there are no fiscal impacts for anyone voting on this, there are fiscal impacts for me and my neighbors' properties. Changing the zoning will significantly decrease our property values, which is not fair when neither of us want this. The planning board cannot approve this change, and I ask the committee to do the same and vote no on this ordinance. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much,
You're welcome.
Mr. Hines. And now we're going to hear from Hyde Clark.
All right. Thank you, Councilwoman. My name is Hyde Clark. I'm the president of the Upper Washington Avenue Neighborhood Association and a resident at 39 Van Buren Street. As the neighborhood association became aware of the zoning classifications for these properties, and that was during the Stewart's proposal. That's because Stewart's proposed to demolish these two residential buildings as part of the redevelopment of the old Key Bank. And at that point, to me, it was clear that it wasn't necessarily a Stewart's issue. It was more a zoning classification issue. Because the zone for these two residential properties is mixed use commercial, it then allows any future developer to look at the old Key Bank and try to bundle these properties together and thus encroach on the neighbors that are currently on Rosemont. When those neighbors purchase their homes on Rosemont, they purchase their homes next to residential properties, next to two-family properties. And the fact that there's parking lots behind the other parcels, I don't think that that's a factor that should be considered. It's like in the zoning drawing, they just drew a straight line as opposed to looking at what the parcels are and what their current use is. I'd like to point out what the property owner stated, that there's a number of residential, businesses on Washington Ave, and says that the mixed use zoning classification is no different for their properties. But that whole list, which is 1035 Washington Ave, 1058, 996, 959, 967, 975, Washington Ave and Victor, Washington Ave and Manning, the zoning classifications for all those properties are as follows: R1M, R2, R2, R1M, 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 and RM. So the inconsistency is that these two properties are zoned mixed use commercial. We did submit a petition with over 45 neighbors. Again, many of those are on Rosemont. That's because if those two buildings were to be demolished, as in the Stewart's proposal, you then have that commercial use abutting right up on these residential homes. The property owner stated that his time on the county legislature, he's never seen a rezone from mixed use commercial to R2. I don't know if that has any weight. This is the USDO was, passed in 2017, 2018. One of the purposes of the USDO is to have time to review what was done, to look at what legislation was passed, what zoning districts, and make corrections. And I know the council continues to work in its review of the USDO to make any corrections on any oversight. So I did submit a copy of the zoning map. I zoomed in on the Upper Washington Avenue Neighborhood Association, and submitted that to the council for your consideration. As you can see, all the way up through Washington Ave are those residential zoning districts. I don't believe that this is taking anything away from the property owner. There's no vested right. There's no, we're mixing up zoning terms, right? There's no grandfathering. There's not a current commercial use at those properties. So the idea that there's some sort of grandfathered right to have a commercial property is an incorrect statement. The statement that there's businesses that are commercial on Washington Ave, you're talking about a use. You're not talking about a zoning classification. It's clear the zoning classification is residential. And that's why I believe that the council should vote in favor of this to correct the two properties to residential and be consistent with all the other properties. If the property owners did want to have a business or other use at the property, they would then have to go through the planning process. If it wasn't a permitted use, they would still have the opportunity to obtain a use variance. And that further protects the residents from a developer that tries to bundle these three properties together. The current use is two-family. This actually makes it so two families allowed.
30 seconds.
And that's all I have for tonight. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. And then we have Paul Lamar. Hello, Paul.
Hi there. Thanks for taking our comments tonight.
Sure, welcome.
My husband and I own a home on Rosemont Street. Our property is abutted by 1061 Washington Avenue. So we appreciated the planning board's second vote in October to reject the application by Stewart's to build a hypermart on the corner of Washington and Colvin, calling the project inconsistent with the character of the neighborhood. And we are not here tonight to relitigate Stewart's. What is the character of the neighborhood? Single family and two-family homes and small apartment buildings, residential in other words, with a handful of businesses and some houses that are permitted by R2. Mistakenly, as Council Member Mike O'Brien has said, they were zoned MUNC. So it is completely appropriate for the Common Council to designate them R2 and thus put to rest the fear that we have that another large-scale project will be introduced. I also urge you to read neighbor Sarah Harrington's cogent letter in support of this ordinance, and Mark and I support this ordinance. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I think that all the community members who wish to speak have spoken. We did receive some written comments, and Danielle, could you read Zach Simpson's comment, please?
Yes, Madam Chair. My name is Zachary Simpson, and I am the Vice President of Upper Washington Avenue Neighborhood Association. I would like to state my strong support for Council Member O'Brien's proposed ordinance amending the properties located at 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue from mixed-use neighborhood center to residential two-family. Over these last few years, I have become familiar with the contents of the Unified Sustainability Development Ordinance, USDO, as well as some of the issues associated with this document and some of the corrections that still need to be made. This is another example where corrections must be made to make the subject properties more consistent with their current use in surrounding properties. I understand the planning board recommended a change to mixed use neighborhood edge rather than residential two-family when this matter was before the board. I disagree. I'm sorry, bear with me 1 second. Sorry, my computer froze. It took a second to come back. I disagree with this recommendation. I think mixed use neighborhood edge has the ability to allow for certain uses that will prove problematic to that location, as well as detrimentally impact surrounding properties, particularly our Rosemont Street neighborhoods. In light of that, the planning board recommendation for mixed use, neighborhood edge should be discarded. I respectfully ask the committee to pass Councilmember O'Brien's ordinance out of committee with a favorable recommendation and bring it to the Common Council for a full vote. Kind regards, Zach Simpson, Vice President of UWANA.
Okay, thank you very much, Danielle. So I guess now I would like to, we did receive a recommendation from the planning board on this issue. And I was wondering if, Brad, could you talk about the recommendation from the planning board?
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, frankly, the Stewart's case in particular, as well as to some degree the rezoning, rarely do we see this many varied opinions on a proposal, really within the staff. And
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt. For some reason, Brad, you're somewhat muted. I don't know if you need to get close to your microphone
Muffled.
or.
Yeah, you're muffled.
Is this better?
Not much. I don't know about other people.
I turned my volume up, I'm good.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's what I need to do.
And then I found out, we'll go back to Sarah Harrington's letter. Danielle, go ahead, Brad.
Okay, I was just trying to state generally that there were very mixed opinions about the proposal, and I think to some degree you're talking about the future of how this site or this area is going to be developed. I think that if the desire is for the two homes to remain as they have been historically as two-family dwellings or something similar, they probably should be rezoned to the R2 district or something similar. If the desire is to facilitate, I've heard, I can't personally speak to the conditions or the reuse potential of the Key Bank property, but some have spoken to challenges with the reuse of that property. If the desire is to accommodate the redevelopment of that site and adjacent sites, it'd probably be better to leave it in the mixed use zoning district. But really, I don't know that there's a vehemently strong opinion from the planning staff one way or the other. I think the planning board was trying to maybe accommodate some of the commercial uses that were spoken about by proposing a mixed use neighborhood edge zone district, which does allow some commercial uses, but also has certain stipulations that requires that the dwellings be made to remain, residential in character with minor accommodations for signage and other sort of things related to commercial use, but not fundamentally changing character.
I don't know. I'm sorry, Brad. If everyone could mute themselves when someone's speaking.
So, I mean, I'm really here more to answer questions than to put forward a really strong opinion one way or the other. I think
Okay.
it's up to the council to decide.
Can you, well, I know I'll start and then maybe we can go around with other council members. If you could, and this is for you, Brad, can you talk a little bit about, I know the recommendation was to possibly consider neighborhood edge. Can you talk a little bit about what that would allow?
Yeah, I mean, a neighborhood edge, for instance, a restaurant or something of that nature would be a conditional use that would see a planning board review as opposed to the mixed use neighborhood center district where that would be an as of right use. So with respect to certain uses, there's a higher threshold for review. There's also certain provisions that we accommodated when we were writing the zoning document. I think some of them were prompted by Councilmember Doche with respect to maintaining the character of structures in those mixed-use neighborhood edge districts if they were to be reutilized for a commercial purpose. So it's sort of trying to balance the two of the residential district as well as commercial districts. This year, I know people have said it's not Rosemont Street, it's Colvin Avenue or vice versa. Really, it's not explicitly either. I mean, these are two properties that are kind of right caught in between. So I think there is some, merit to a transition of sorts, but, again, it all depends on what the desire is for the future of these sites moving forward.
Okay, thank you. So let's go around now to committee members with questions and comments. Judy?
Yes, the thing that struck me when, my understanding of zoning is that you want to have some reasonable plan behind what you're zoning, and there's compatible uses for properties that are adjacent to one another. And I found it interesting in looking at the zoning map that everything else along Washington Avenue is zoned R2 or R1 or R1M, I guess. And those are properties that are not on a side street, that are directly facing Washington Avenue. When I look at these two properties, it seems to me as almost as though what we're doing is spot zoning to allow these to be different, zoned differently than any other similar property in the area. Now, I understand that there have been commercial uses of this. There are semi-commercial uses of some of the other properties along Washington Avenue, but my understanding is those are predominantly essentially home office, old home office uses, which require people to live in the residence. And those properties did not get rezoned as, for mixed use there. So when I look at from a comprehensive planning standpoint, that is what I'm looking at here. It makes sense for that one piece of property that's right on the corner, that's a bank that, it's sort of similar to the gas station. Okay, it semi-fronts on Coven Avenue, but all the properties, and there's one minor exception for some RM, and we have throughout the city, anytime something was already 3 or 4 apartments in it, we did make that exception to bring them into conformity with the zoning. So I'm wondering why this would not be some form of spot zoning to have in the way that this has been done currently, and why don't we correct that and have it be zoned similar to all other properties fronting on Washington Avenue in that area?
Okay, thank you.
Kathy,
yes, Mike.
Could you read Sarah Harrington's letter?
Sure. Let's go back just for a second, Danielle.
Yes, this letter submitted by Sarah Harrington, but is also signed by Paul Lamar, Mark Emer, Janet Miller, Gregory Miller, Christopher Conti, Deborah Conti, and Albert Wilson IV. And it reads as follows. Dear council members, we represent a number of residents of Rosemont Street whose properties are closely situated to the properties that are subject of the above referenced ordinance. We write to express our support for Council Member O'Brien's application to amend the zoning map to change the classification of 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue from MUNC, Mixed Use Neighborhood Center, to R2, two-family residential. By way of background, prior to the adoption of the current Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance in 2017, the City of Albany zoning ordinance in effect when the undersigned neighbors purchased our homes zoned the subject properties as commercial office. With the passage of the USDO, the properties were zoned as MUNC, which changed the scope of the permissible and conditional uses. Notably, the MUNC zone does not allow as permissible or conditional uses the current use of properties as two-family dwellings. Subsequent to the zoning change, Stewart Shops sought to demolish the 2 residential properties at 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue, along with 2 Colvin Avenue, for the purposes of developing a gas station hypermart. The planning board reviewed the application of Stewart's at its meetings and hearings in April, May, August, and October of 2020. At the public meeting/hearings on August 25th, 2020, and again on October 28th of 2020, the planning board voted to deny the conditional use application. While Stewart Shop's proposal was rightfully denied, the zoning of these properties should be amended to ensure that future development proposals that are similarly out of scale with the surrounding uses and inconsistent with the character of the surrounding neighborhood are not permitted. The subject properties face Washington Avenue, and all of the other properties in the vicinity on Washington Avenue are zoned R1 or R2. Colvin Avenue is a mixed-use corridor. However, the subject properties do not face Colvin Ave, and the only apparent reason that they were zoned mixed use to begin with is that they fell within the depth of the Colvin Avenue facing properties. According to the property owners, the properties at 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue have been used as residential properties with occasional commercial occupations conducted therein. For example, there was reference to a real estate company operating out of one of the properties. If the properties were rezoned as R2, this would not preclude the residents thereof from conducting such a home occupation, which the USDO defines as a business, profession, occupation, or trade conducted by the occupant of a dwelling unit or accessory structure, and that is incidental and secondary to the use of the dwelling unit. The requested zoning map change would ensure consistency of the current use. Importantly, the properties offer affordable housing in the neighborhood. Consistent with the Albany 2030 plan, formalizing the classification of the properties as R2 serves the goals of retaining a diversity of housing options and maintaining the balance between rentals and owner-occupied homes and the overall mixed income neighborhood that currently exists. Further, as became apparent during the course of the planning board's consideration of the Stewart's application, the properties at 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue are important to maintaining the character of the surrounding neighborhood and ensuring a land use pattern that creates a balance of residential and complementary scaled commercial uses. Based on the foregoing, we ask the board recommend approval of the proposed change to the zoning map. Thank you for your consideration. And that letter again is signed by Sarah Harrington, Paul Lamar, Mark Emer, Janet Miller, Gregory Miller, Christopher Conti, Deb Conti, and Albert Wilson IV.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. And then we'll turn to Alfredo, Councilmember Ballerin.
Thank you. Brad, I have a quick question. Before the USDO, this properties was zoned as commercial office, and what were they able to be? What were they able to use? What pre-2017 restrictions and availabilities do they have?
The commercial office district was less varied in the types of commercial uses that were allowed. I can't recall each of them, but it was really structured around office as the principal use, with a couple other uses maybe contemplated. The allowances in terms of building height and other measures were in some cases more intensive than the current MUNC zoning. And there were probably in some cases, such as maybe lot coverage, less intensive. So, they're quite a bit different in terms of, I think the neighborhood center is actually more of a neighborhood scale district, whereas the commercial office was probably somewhat of an improper classification. Although I would note that all of Colvin Avenue was zoned commercial office, and being that a lot of the uses on Colvin were office buildings, that's not entirely surprising. I think what someone spoke to here is the depths of the properties on that side of Colvin Avenue typically go all the way back to the back of the Rosemont properties, whereas the property on the corner that has the bank in it or had the bank in it does not retain the same depths as its other cove inhabitable lots. Where that depth would typically exist, the two houses on Washington Avenue reside. So when the lines were drawn, they were drawn as a straight line along the back of those Cove Avenue properties, and the two residential properties ended up in the commercial zone district.
Okay, my follow-up question is, with that type of zoning, the property owner wasn't limited to having to live in the property to be able to rent it out for commercial office space, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hoey.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, follow through. Brad, I got a question for you. This went before the planning board for a recommendation. What was the result of that?
The planning board issued a favorable recommendation with the advisory note that the Common Council also look at and consider the mixed-use neighborhood edge zoning district. So I think that's an endorsement of the down zoning of the two properties, but to maybe take a broader look at whether it should, be in that lower end, that sort of transitional commercial district, or go back explicitly to what the buildings are being used as with the R2 zoning.
Okay, thank you. Another question, follow up on the Key Bank property. I don't know if you know, and I'm just going to ask you, do you know what the acreage is there for that building and the parking lot? Is it an acre, a half acre, a quarter acre? Do you have any idea?
It's about a third of an acre.
A third. And then if you include the two houses, so we're looking at the steward shop, what would that be, an acre or?
Closer to an acre. I'd say probably almost a half of an acre.
Okay. One of the things that came up, Kathy, I don't know if you know, somebody said there was a 50 signature petition put in for people against the ordinance. I don't remember seeing that. Was that distributed to the committee members?
Well, Gary Demolowitz brought that up to me over the weekend and in an email today. And I reached out to the planning department about it and our council also. And they reminded me that those letters were from the earlier steward shop proposal.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with the rezone then?
Well, no, it doesn't. I think that part of the property owner's wishes are to, be able to have a project like Stewart Shop, and these letters did speak favorably of the Stewart Shop.
Yeah, but and again, I just want to make sure that we're hearing both sides. What we're not
Right.
dealing with Stewart's right now. What we're dealing with is rezoning these two properties, and I just want to make sure. I don't want somebody to say that I, knee-jerk reaction that, I'd like to be able to weigh everything. So,
Yes.
But you
Can
are
we-
saying there is no petition against the rezone itself.
Well, there's no petition that I'm aware of. These letters did pertain to the Stewart Shop legislation, but we can read one of the letters because it's a form letter that people signed. Just because it would be helpful to council members to be aware of what was written in that.
Again, but that's for a different thing. I want to just, stay with the facts.
Okay,
On
yes,
what we're dealing with, okay.
that was for the Stewart Shop. I think there was some confusion there though, because I think Mr. Demolowitz thought it would apply to this proposal.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's the end of my questions.
Okay. Other questions and comments from council members or committee members first, of course. Anybody else wish to speak on this? Councilmember Igo. Joe, you got to unmute. We can't hear you. Joe?
Hello? You hear me now? Okay. Brad, maybe you can answer this. I drove over that way probably last week, and the Sunoco station across the street. Up against that fence, they have a sign on it, welcome pizza place and deli coming soon. Now, what Judy just said, a few people said that all the way down Washington Avenue, going down to R1 or whatever it is, you got offices interspersed there, but why would you allow something like that to go in there? Was it a variance, or is that zone separate right now? Because it seems like in the same neighborhood, you're letting a donut place go in, or a pizza place. Yes, Michael?
My understanding is that pizza place is not going into that house. That house is 1045 Washington. The pizza place is going into the old market, the one that used to be Leon's Market. It's been empty as a market because it doesn't have its own parking. And they worked out some kind of an agreement, or, you know, with the gas station owner to allow parking for that pizza market. And I don't know what the status of that is. I haven't heard whether that, you know, required any special planning board approval, or whether it.
Was that stopped by buildings because of not being zoned correctly, or just because they found a better spot to go? That was one concern I had.
Yeah, but that sign looks like the pizza place is coming to 1045 Washington, but it isn't.
And there's some
It's
sign, some sign on the white building. There was anyhow a couple of weeks ago. Besides the
Oh,
fence.
I thought it was on the fence or something.
The
You know,
it was on the fence, but there was something on the building saying "Welcome Deli."
oh, because I know that the owner of the gas station bought that 1045 Washington. It was vacant. Actually, it was.
Yeah, it's been vacant.
Yeah, it was a vacant building. And then I believe he rents it, but he definitely owns it. He shouldn't have a sign on it.
Yeah.
But then he also bought Leon's Market because it didn't have any commercial use because it had no parking. But he, as the owner of the Sunoco, has parking. So if he's going to put a pizza place in there, I assume he's going to
I
allow
was wondering
his
if that was
parking
changing
lot.
how he was getting away with what it was, the way it was signed. Now the other question.
Well, he shouldn't have signed it. I didn't notice that. He should not have a sign hanging on that house.
The other question I have, maybe for Brad, and the neighborhood's concerned, the property where there's a law firm on the corner of Lincoln and Calvin, okay, that's a very big parking lot there, very big. And should that be zoned something different right now? Because that's next to, that would be backing up to properties the same as you're discussing this property.
My understanding is that the Greenwich parking lot is totally within a mixed-use neighborhood center. See, on the other side of the street, the commercial line zigged and zagged around the houses, unlike the situation with these two houses in Washington. But as I remember looking at the map, and Brad can correct me if I'm wrong, that big parking lot in Greenwich's law firm is totally on mixed-use commercial.
Which was being proposed by buildings for Washington, these two houses on Washington Avenue, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
See, I just have a problem with someone buying some properties or inheriting the properties in zone once, and then all of a sudden a proposed plan is coming up that everyone just jumps out of, you know, the woodwork and say, you know, let's change these and try to protect it.
Yeah, but you know, the discussion that was had at the committee meeting, and if Amy's on, she could join us, because the point which she made, I remember at the planning board meeting was all those historical uses that they may have had, the real estate office, or if they wanted to put a dentist office or a daycare, that they could still do. So really they weren't losing any of the commercial function that they might have had over the years.
So
that's the way I understand it.
When I made those comments, you know, I did a little bit more research into the history of the zoning, you know, for that corridor, and looking at it a little bit more. And I do still think that, I mean, most of those uses, the way they were described, they would qualify as home occupations, but you know, that would mean that they would have to be owner occupied to have those. But certainly still, you know, I do think that, you know, they're still keeping their character. The buildings are keeping their character. And I don't think there was ever, you know, like there weren't commercial buildings, fully commercial buildings on those sites. So I would continue to say that, but you know, as Brad said before, it seems like they were rezoned to commercial. I'm not exactly sure when, but sometime I think in the 70s maybe.
Joe, did you want to finish?
I thought Amy was still talking, but
Oh, I don't know.
and I'm concerned with some of the precedents that are being set. I have a piece of property that was, I believe it was, well, I'm not sure exactly, okay? But in the next plan, last USDO came out, it was suggested by planning that this piece of property was zoned R1. Now developers are coming in wanting to put five-story buildings up, whatever, and to do that, they need a rezone. So, you know, we just do something, and now we want to change it right away, and I don't like the precedents it's setting. That's what I'm thinking about right now, so that everybody knows. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Other comments by council members? I see we also have Council President Corey Ellis, Council Member Owusu Anani here as well, and I think that's it. Owusu Anani.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is something that I've been, you know, when I first got wind of this decision and this request, and also this piece of legislation, I was doing some research, and this started in last year in November. And I generally have some concern just on the face of it that this site is potentially was thought about as it relates to being developed to put a Stewart's there. And I believe that if it wasn't for the Stewarts, we would have probably left it as what it is currently zoned as. And I'm thinking about the precedents that we're going to be setting if this type of action is taken, right? So if a developer is thinking about utilizing a zone or a property, and they reach out to that individual, and the neighbors or the representatives reach out and say that just because they don't want a specific development at that location, should they have the ability to change the zoning to fit what they want in that community. As one of the youngest council members and individuals in my generation, we're being encouraged to buy two-family homes, because many of us have student debt that are probably going to take many years to recover. And to see that if I was to purchase a two-family property, and if an individual wanted to develop on it, if I was to sell it, now a common council member and neighbors are saying, well, we don't want to see that type of development there, so we're going to change it from R2 to R1. And I just generally have some concern about that. So I will say with all that information and hearing more people out, probably will be voting no on this ordinance if it does come to the floor. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments by council members? Joyce Love, Council Member Love.
Yes, this is question is for Brad. I just want to know, why did you decide to send this back to the council? Just for the council members to vote on this only. Is Brad still here?
Yeah, Joyce, I'm not sure I understand the question. This is Michael Bryan's legislation.
Okay, but did maybe it wasn't you when they said they came in front of the planning and planning send it back to the council? Did I hear that right?
Planning is tasked with making a recommendation to the council. And in the recommendation, they made an advisory note that in addition to the R2 zone that Michael Bryan is proposing, that you also consider the mixed use neighborhood edge zone. And I think that they thought that was a balance that would to some degree protect or buffer the residential properties on Rosemont Street, but still potentially facilitate, stronger reuse potentials for those properties or the site as a whole. So more of a transition zone. They didn't explicitly say that that was the right answer, but they said that that's something that the council should weigh as a consideration before they act.
All right.
Yeah, and Joyce, if I could just follow up on what Brad said, it's the council that has the authority on zoning, and that was reinforced by a recent court decision, which we received. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that we don't, go to the planning board to air things out with them. We do, and that's what happened. They gave the opinion that it was a favorable opinion, provided that we also look to see maybe whether the mixed-use neighborhood edge would work. But I think in light of the comments that have been made and reviewing the letter from the neighbors and from Sarah Harrington, there are a lot of uses, and Brad confirmed this, there are a lot of uses in mixed-use neighborhood edge, which would be far beyond the character of what it used to be, or a commercial office. And quite frankly, the only reason it got these properties got included into the new mixed-use neighborhood center was because the old map, whenever it was created, the one that had it as commercial office, had the property back and right up to Rosemont Street. Whereas the other side of the street, curiously, the commercial property zig and zag around the existing residential properties. So that's why it went to the planning board, and that's why they looked at it, but that's also why they sent it back to us.
So 1057 and 1061 Washington Avenue, this is where they want to put Stewart's?
That's where Stewart's wanted to come in and demolish them.
Okay.
They weren't going to keep them there. They were going to demolish them and build what looks like a big Stewart's.
So the 1057 and the 1061 will be in somebody's backyard.
1057 and 1061 were going to be demolished, and then they would be in somebody's backyard. Yes.
I think that's NIMBY, but that's just my opinion.
Well, but we looked at their character, and the point is that there have been small commercial businesses allowed. Nothing like a super Stewart's. So that's and quite frankly, when the old council did the USDO, we put a provision in there that we were not infallible. There might be mistakes, and I think that this is one of the mistakes, was that it didn't, that unlike the other side of the street, which through the commercial part of it zigs and zagged around the residential properties, this side didn't. And there was no, as I remember, there was no discussion as to why they just simply drew a straight line down the backs of Rosemont Street and just adopted that same boundary. So
now, go ahead.
Wouldn't they have to go along with the property lines? Isn't that why they're straight on one side and zigzagged on the other side?
From
Rosemont?
Yeah, and the bank never owned these two properties. The only one who was going to combine the ownership and blend it all into one property didn't happen until Stewart's came.
But it would have been one straight line all the way down Rosemont, even if they bought those houses.
No, it would not have. If, like the other side of the street, they were preserving residential properties, it would have zigs and zagged around them.
Okay, thank you.
So I just got one more question. 2 Colvin Avenue, is that the Key Bank?
I believe it is, yeah. Or that's either 1 or 2.
It's 2 Colvin.
2 Colvin, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And actually, JR, just can you fill everyone in about the seeker on this project?
Yeah, it's unlisted action. So in my memo that I sent out earlier about a couple hours ago, I prepared a part 2 and part 3 for the council, the committee member and the council's review. It's an unlisted action per SECRA. So it just, part 2 and part 3 just need to be going over. I made a recommendation that there would be no impact since this is a downsize, and it's strictly staying with the residential aspect.
Okay, thank you. And also, also in your memo, you talk about the county planning process. Can you just fill everyone in again about that?
Yeah, so under General Municipal Law 239M, if a property that's being rezoned is within a 500 feet of, there's a various lists, but this one, under this ordinance, it's within 500 feet of the Harriman State Office campus. So that triggered automatically a county referral. In October, I sent the original application and supplemented it in November. We have not received a decision from them, and under General Municipal Law 239M as well, once you submit it in full, the county has 30 days to respond, or they can request a 30-day extension, which they have not. I followed up today with them and they haven't gotten back to me. So we do not have to wait on county referral decision on this.
Thank you. So I think this is, for me, this is a difficult proposal because we do have a situation where the property owners understood this to be a certain zoning, and now we're saying that it should be something else. But I also feel that what's been presented here tonight and in the letters that we received makes a pretty good case for this to be, the zoning to be changed back to residential. And the fact that with the current zoning, you could not have, does not permit residential. And you would still be able to have home occupations similar to what you find along Washington Avenue there, if it was changed to residential. And then some of the things that Amy was speaking of, that buildings would be able to keep their the same character as most of the other buildings along Washington Avenue. And most of the fact that most of the uses there are home office. So I tend to lean towards supporting this legislation, and I'm interested to hear what other council members are thinking. Other committee members first. You know, this is some, go ahead, Council Member Ballerin.
Thank you, Chair. This one is a hard one. I don't really like the idea of government telling anyone what to do with properties. If you bought it in a certain way, I think the government should do no harm when it comes to how you can use your private property. So this one's tough because in one time, you've got property owners that purchased properties, and before 2017, they can use the properties to have office space and didn't have to live in the properties. They kept them as investment properties and they used them to the limit that they bought them with without any issues. And then on the other hand, you have individuals that bought properties being abutted to properties that had certain limitations and could not exceed what those limitations were. So really, the USDO in 2017 has given us another doozy. Thank you, USDO, because we now have to debate who we try to do no harm to. And I've spoken to the property owners. I've spoken to Mike. I attended the Upper Washington Neighborhood Association meeting last week because I wanted to hear from the other homeowners, the homeowners that are abutted by these buildings. I've spoke to Amy, and I think I would like for us to see something that allows these properties to go back to their pre-2017 status, where they can still rent their office space like they used to, without having to live in the building. And I'm not sure if that's something we can do, but I want to be fair here to everybody. And we are I feel like we're in a situation where it's difficult to be fair to everybody without government causing somebody harm on their property. And as someone that knows how hard it is to invest in property and how much you put out there when you do your investment in property, I don't want to cause harm to either of these two. And the best way I can see doing that, and I know the property owners probably won't agree with me on this, or I know somebody won't agree with me on this, is to try to bring it back to the pre-2017 status, so that the same benefits and privileges that these property owners had when they bought their properties, the same benefits and privileges that they have today. And I guess that's really more Brad and Amy, question.
Brad or Amy, do you have any thoughts on this?
I don't believe it's possible because, the former districts don't exist anymore. I do think the mixed use neighborhood edge zone is comparable in certain ways to the commercial office zone. Certain of a lower intensity and scale in terms of development potential, but it does allow for some commercial uses like offices as would have been previously allowed. So that would be the most comparable scenario in the current USDO to what they were previously zoned before, in my opinion.
If I could just add, I'm not the planner here, so I defer to Brad on those types of things. But, just because it was zoned something else before doesn't mean that zoning was, the most appropriate. And it certainly doesn't mean that the zoning should be changed back, as opposed to, figuring out, what is the most appropriate zoning for it right now. Like I said, I'm not the planner, so I won't weigh in on what that is exactly, but there's certainly no reason that we have to go back to something just because it used to be there.
I understand that and I respect that, but when you buy a property, you buy it with certain expectations of how you can use it. So I buy a 4-unit, and then I buy it at the value of a 4-unit, and then I'm told I can only have a 3-unit. Well, that's not the same value that I had before. So if individuals bought these properties as commercial office properties, I think it's our responsibility to find a way to address that issue. We created this problem. We created it in 2017. So I think we have the responsibility to be creative in our way to address this problem in whatever way we need to.
Councilman, if I could just add to what I said before, I think, the owners purchased these properties as 2-family properties. Regardless of what the zoning is, they have a right in relative perpetuity to continue using them as 2-family properties. There was a window where they had a greater potential due to the overlaying zoning designation to use them for other things under the commercial office designation, just as there's a window now for them to use them for other things under the mixed use neighborhood center. It's up to them to some degree to take advantage of that window of opportunity, which, can be changed as a result of a legislative proposal. So, it's not, they can continue to use them as they were used. They just may not be able to exercise a greater potential outside of a certain time window, so.
Other comments? Judy?
Wait, so is that a yes vote or no vote? I mean, sorry.
That's you mean from Brad?
From Alfredo. I'm just concerned. I'm just curious.
All right.
I thought you just wanted to get a limits test on how you feel about how certain council members will be voting. I don't
Well,
know what it's like.
it sounds like he wants a compromise.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
That's what I'm looking for.
That's Alfredo for you.
Judy?
So I've gotten kind of lost in this. The current use of this is not a commercial office. Am I right about that?
Yes.
So the current property owners have determined, aside from the rejected proposal for stewards, that that the best use of this is not consistent necessarily with the current zoning, that they're using it as a 1 or 2 family house. They're using it for residential purposes.
Well, it wasn't just as a thing, it wasn't the owners of the property who proposed this zoning map ordinance. They're actually against it.
Well, I understand that. But in terms of the default of what has turned out to be the current best use of that particular property, I'm trying to understand. I mean, I think that that's a factor. I mean, we can talk about, oh, there might be more value in having it be zoned this way versus that way. But if while it is zoned in this manner, it is being used as a residential property, which would be utilized on, would be allowed under R2, I don't really know that there's significant adverse consequences to the owners currently, except to the extent that they would look to potentially sell it in conjunction with a development for 2 Calvin Avenue, which was the proposal. I will say, in having driven by that particular area many, many times, one of the things that I look at is there's a little house next to the gas station. You know, sometimes I think, oh, that's not necessarily the most desirable place to live. Would it make sense to convert that property to a different zoning, and the one next to it to a different zoning? And I think that the arguments can be made more so for those than can be made for the current zoning for these 2 particular properties. And I think one of the, you know, and then you look at, well, once you start looking at rezoning sections of a street to a different use, then it starts to change the character of the street. So there's obvious reasons why that was not done with the property next to the gas station on the other side of Calvin Avenue for the properties that face Washington Avenue. So in whole, I think that, you know, I understand the difficulties of this. It seems to me as though we probably did make a mistake with the current zoning on it, given its current uses, given the fact that it abuts M1 or R1 properties. In general, in the city, when you look at zoning throughout the city, there's not a lot of places where you put commercial properties right up against R1
Residential, yeah.
zoning. And unless it's been a long-standing use like that, in most cases, abutting the rear of properties. So I lean in the direction of favoring, supporting this particular ordinance.
Any other committee members would like to weigh in as to how they're leaning? Councilmember Hoey.
Yeah, you know, I listened to Alfredo and I understand the difficulty, but one thing that keeps popping in my head is if the stewards went through and they, you know, they tore down the bank, they tore down the two houses. Now you have a 24-hour gas station abutting people who bought property that was residential. They might have kids there and stuff like that. I would go ballistic. I'll be honest with you. You know, having lights on, cars coming in, horns blowing, and you know, so you know, everybody wants to make the big buck, and I think that's what this boils down to. That you have a big company like Stewart's come in, you know, pay you top dollar for your property, and you know, to me, it just doesn't fit into the neighborhood. So, I mean, it, like Alfredo said, this is a tough decision, but you know, it goes back to 2017, and you know, up in my ward, I have almost the same thing. I have a piece of property zoned urban, and it's definitely not an urban area, but this is what we're dealing with. So that's all I have to say.
Okay. Alfredo, I do understand your interest in coming up with a compromise. I don't see that that is possible here. I'm going to put a motion on the table to move this legislation forward with a positive recommendation. And
I'll second it.
Okay. Discussion? All in favor? Okay. All right, looks like who's against? Joyce? All right, 4-1. Looks like the legislation goes forward with a positive recommendation to the full council. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone's time tonight. A motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Okay, all in favor. Thank you.
Aye.
And good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night, everybody.